Stop that. Wait just a moment. Wait for them to, they're just lagging a little bit. Then I'll pull it up. But we're live, so they're going to hear everything that we say right now. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're connecting and we see some of you are joining on. And I think we're up. Okay, good. Good. Well, hi, everybody. I hope you're all well. We're doing pretty well.
I'm doing all right.
We're doing all right. If you're checking in with us and you don't know what this is the YouTube channel for the First Presbyterian Church of El Cajon, and I'm Pastor Kim, and I'm joined by my better half, my husband, Jeremy Dossie Richardson. Let's just talk about that from the start. We are both hyphenated. This has caused a little bit of confusion over the years and initially alarm from my mother. I am a Dossie, and there aren't a lot of us. There's a few in Louisiana, and my father had all girls. And you called me Dossie for years.
I did.
So then when we were engaged, I just felt like I didn't want to drop the Dossie. Mm-hmm. And you were fine with that. And I was going to take on Richardson, but then you didn't want to be.
Don't want to have two different last names.
Yeah. So he thought about it. And then he said, let's just both hyphenate. So we're all the Dossie Richardsons. All of our kids are Dossie Richardsons.
There it is.
Cheers. So I am joined today by Jeremy Dossie Richardson, and we're going to pick up on something that's become really important to our faith journeys, into our spiritual formation. It's something that I talked about a couple of weeks ago with you, and we're going to hear a little bit more from Jeremy's perspective, specifically around as we talk about inner peace, transformation into Christlikeness. We have found the body as an essential part of growth, of growing in really inhabiting our bodies, and that wasn't something that the church taught us. So we've been, is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
That's fair to say. So we're going to talk a little bit about our bodies today. And not only is this critical to faith development, but I also think in a time like this, when we're experiencing so much anxiety in different ways. It may be the anxiety in response to how other people are experiencing COVID-19. It might be anxiety from being homebound or a myriad other things. But that's very real. Anxiety is very real. Depression is on the rise right now. And so I hope that our discussion of this might just bring about some awareness. It's Convos with Kim. It's just a conversation. So do you want to share anything more about that before? I'm going to do a practice in a minute, but
well, we'll get back into that later, right?
Yeah.
So I think we can hold that until then.
Should we share now how we got into this?
Sure. We can.
I would say that both there was a longing to be more like healed and transformed by Christ, but parallel to that is that we kind of cyclically hit the same problems in our marriage. I think that a lot of relationships of different kinds, whether it's friendships or family dynamics or marriages, you sometimes like are hitting the same cycles over and over. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that one that we wounded each other in the same ways repeatedly, but it actually had like direct impact to how we were experiencing God and ourselves. And so it was just kind of noticing that we dealt with stress very differently from the beginning in our marriage.
Yes, very differently.
Be kind.
No, that's a neutral statement. That's neutral. And I think most of the people who have partners and spouses out there would say that their partners deal with stress differently than they do. So part of, I think, the marriage journey is first understanding yourself, and understanding how I'm going to respond in a way that ideally would help me to be less reactive, or at least know what's going on so I can name that, versus kind of operating in this default response. But then secondarily, I think it's understanding how you respond, how your partner responds in stress, so you can kind of identify and see what's happening. But and we'll get into this later, but I think that one of the keys with the understanding our physical bodies is that our bodies can actually tell us things before we can process them mentally and emotionally. So as we become more kind of integrated or in tune, what I like to call congruence is like kind of body, mind, and spirit. So like if there's a decision that's happening, or like, is there congruence? Does it make sense? Kind of as I process it intellectually, what is my spirit saying? What is the spirit saying to me about that decision? And then as I even talk about it, how does that land for me physically? Does that cause like anxiety, or like, is there like an elevation? Does my heart rate go up? That's probably not a good sign if it's something that I'm going to be deciding, or it's just a sign to be listened to. And so I think congruence looks like all those things kind of being online and in tune with one another, so we can respond from a whole place.
Yeah. That's deep.
So deep.
I'd also say that, we have the benefit of history on our side. And so we've been able to see our ancestors in how they worship God really healthily and then unhealthily. We've been able to learn from, abusive cycles within the church, certainly in our own time, but throughout history. And this is not always true throughout church history, but in recent centuries, there has been this gravitation toward the mind, toward certitude, and toward really understanding and knowing all there is to know about God, but from a cognitive place. And so again, and not necessarily a bad thing, but how do we balance that with our heart, with emotions, with our body, and with what we're sensing, and even learning to worship God with the fullness of our being, with the fullness of our mind, but allowing, like we talked about with Thomas on Sunday, is there room for question? Is there room for us to be human and to be doubtful? Because God's the one who is the sure thing. We are moving through a lot of different life experiences, and God holds us in that. So I know that there was kind of a corrective in my own faith journey where I learned to integrate emotions and heart, because at some point in various contexts, I had been told that my feelings were not trustworthy, that your heart ebbs and flows, but scripture memorization and what you know in your mind, that's what will guide you. And so there's just needed to be a corrective in that way. But I'd say then more recently in our later adult years, we have found like another missing link with the body, in realizing how much the body in different ways inside and of course outside the church, the body is shamed and is made into, I think sometimes something that can be used for abuse or image. And yet, God shows up to us in bodily form. And Christ after the resurrection shows up with the fullness of his body still, with the wounds still apparent. And so what does it mean to be embodied beings, and to really use our flesh for good and not just deny it, but to integrate it into the fullness of our faith journey. So in a little bit, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, like what role your body has played a positive role in your faith journey, or how maybe you were shamed, whether it was sexually, whether it was in just never listening to your body because it was irrelevant, but how that contributed to your faith story. So maybe be thinking about some of those things, but right now we're going to do a practice. And this is sometimes done in faith circles. Sometimes it's done in more like wisdom traditions or even in therapeutic practices. And it's called a body scan. And there's a lot of different ways that body scans can be led. So this is just one version. But I invite you right now, if you would, to get really comfortable. If you're able to, and you're sitting in a chair, maybe put both feet on the ground. Relax your hands in your lap. It might be comfortable for you to close your eyes. And we're going to engage my version of a body scan this morning. And you'll notice the word sensation come up a lot. And that is a word that is very different than feelings. Feelings often have an emotive sense. Can you say something about sensations, actually? Like what they are?
Yeah, I mean, part of, I don't want to get off topic too much here, but part of understanding our bodies is how, like, what are the actual sensations, and can you give words and descriptions to those sensations? So that could be a swelling like in your chest or in your gut, or a hollow feeling, or like being able to name what's physiologically happening. It could just be pain. It could be a dull pain or warm pain, radiating pain. Like just even being able to name those things just gets kind of pathways of communication between our minds and bodies really talking, I think. And so just like with anything, you have to learn kind of the basics of it. So I don't think we don't need to overthink all those different sensations. But just, oh, it kind of feels like this. And so is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that is. So just be aware that some of us have done a lot of work around emotions, like identifying anger, or sadness, or guilt, or fear, and how that shows up. And there is sometimes overlap with our bodies. But it has been interesting to me how long it's taken me just to be aware of my own body. And to be able to identify, is that coolness? Is that warmth? Is that nothing? Is that tingling? And how important it is to be self-aware. We're going to talk about that in terms of our Christian faith more in a moment. But when that word comes up over and over, sensation, if you feel nothing, and I mean feel like in your body physically, that's totally fine. Be aware of what you do sense or feel on a sensational level, on a physical level. So, comfortable in your chair. Try to begin by sitting upright with your hands on your thighs or by your side. And make sure your back has support, that you're comfortable. You might want to even scoot back into your couch or chair. Make sure that it feels good. Sit as if you're suspended by a string from the top of your head, and take several long, slow, deep breaths. Breathe in through your nose and out through your nose or mouth. Feel your stomach expand on an inhale and relax as you let go in an exhale. Take just a moment to breathe. Close your eyes and breathe normally now, relaxing any unnecessary tension in your body or mind. Let go of the noises around you. and begin to shift your attention from the outside to the inside of yourself. If you're distracted by sounds in the room, simply notice this and just keep bringing your focus back to your breathing. Now, with your eyes closed, bring your attention down all the way to your feet. And start by observing sensations in your feet. You may notice the weight or pressure of your feet against the ground. You might feel vibration or coolness or heat. You might want to move or wiggle your toes a little, feeling your toes against your socks or shoes on the ground. And just notice this without any judgment. You may want to imagine sending your breath down all the way to your feet, as if the breath is traveling through your nose, through your lungs, down through your abdomen, all the way down to your feet. And then back up again, out through your nose and lungs. And perhaps you don't feel anything at all, and that is totally fine too. Just allow yourself to feel the sensation of not feeling anything. When you're ready, move your attention from your feet up to your ankles and your calves, your knees, then your thighs. Notice the sensations you're experiencing throughout your legs. Maybe you notice pressure or pulsing or heaviness or lightness. Sense anything you can from your nerves, your muscles, your bones. You want to sense as deeply and specifically as possible. As you breathe in and out, consider your legs with gratitude. These legs have been with you and they've helped you your whole life. If your mind begins to wander, just notice this without judging yourself and bring your mind back to noticing the sensations in your legs. If you notice discomfort or pain or stiffness, don't judge it, just pay attention to it. Observe how all sensations rise and fall. They shift and change, sometimes moment to moment. Notice how no sensation is permanent. Just observe and allow these feelings, these sensations to be in the moment right now, just as they are. Breathing normally, move your attention to the sensations in your lower back and pelvis, softening and releasing as you breathe in and out. Slowly move your attention up to your mid-back and upper back. Allow yourself to be curious about what you sense, what you feel. You may become aware of sensations in the muscle, temperature, or points of contact with your chair or couch. With each out breath, you may let go of the tension that you're carrying. Consider your body with kindness. And very gently shift your focus to your stomach and all the internal organs here. Maybe you notice the feeling of clothing, or the process of digestion, or your belly rising or falling with each breath. If you notice any opinions arising about these areas, gently let these go and return to noticing sensation. As you continue to breathe, bring your awareness to your chest and heart region. And just notice your heartbeat. Observe how the chest rises during the inhale and how the chest falls during the exhale. And let go of any judgments that may arise. Consider your heart with kindness. Now shift your focus to your hands, to your fingers and fingertips. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften, to relax. And if your mind wanders, just gently bring it back with awareness to your hands. Now move your attention up into your wrists, your forearms, your elbows, your upper arms, and your shoulders. Observe the sensations or lack of sensations that might be occurring there. You may even notice some difference between your left side and your right side, your left and right arms, and there's no need to judge this. As you exhale, may you experience your arms soften and release tension. And consider your arms with gratitude. God made these arms. Continue breathing normally and shift your focus to the neck, to the shoulder and throat region. This is an area where we often have a lot of tension. Be with the sensations here. It could be tightness or rigidity or holding. You may notice your shoulders moving along with your breath. Let go of any thoughts or any stories that you're telling about this area. And as you breathe, you may even feel tension rolling off your shoulders. On the next out breath, shift your focus and direct your attention to the scalp, the head, and the face. Do you need to soften your jaw right now? Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Observe all the sensations occurring there. Notice the movement of the air as you breathe into or out of your nostrils or mouth. And as you exhale, you might notice the softening of any tension you may be holding. God gave you this head and this face. Consider it with gratitude. And now, let your attention expand out to include the entire body as a whole. Bring into your awareness the top of your head all the way down to the bottom of your toes. Feel the gentle rhythm of the breath as it moves through the body. Feel God's unforced rhythms of grace hold you in love. As you come to the end of this practice, take a full, deep breath and thank God for your body. And thank your body for working so hard and always being with you. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes and return your attention to the present moment. So that's a body scan. And body scans are being used more and more in therapy, and sometimes after injuries, they've been used for mental health. But it is just one tool, and you can find lots of body scans online. It's just one tool to help us to become aware of actually what's going on in our bodies, to become aware of the stories. I know that there are more shameful parts of my body, and whenever we hit those areas, immediate thoughts arise. Sometimes I'm unaware of pain I've been holding somewhere, or that I've been tight in a certain part of my body, and it's an invitation to really relax and rest and breathe, but also to encounter God with gratitude, these bodies that God has given us. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more. And if you want to contribute, you can certainly speak in the chat. I mentioned this before, but I think I'm curious about how perhaps specifically in your Christian faith journey, how you've been given mixed messages about your body, and how if you've been kind of told to deny it and not even notice it, or how the body has been used in really positive ways in your faith formation.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, growing up in a really conservative Southern Baptist context, the message, whether it was purposeful or not, was that, hey, your body is bad and your spirit is good. And they were really kind of these divided parts of who we are. And so the body was to be denied or ignored, or kind of both, while you kind of tend to the spiritual side of ourselves. And I think it's really a challenging message to kind of rewrite and unpack, because, as you mentioned earlier, there is this physicality to God in Christ. And so there's like the fact that God shows up in the physical world in a physical body with the limitations of the physical body. It just speaks to the importance of kind of physical matter, the fact that Christ needed to sleep and eat and drink and rest, all of that. That it's really, it doesn't seem to mesh to me that then we would place such little importance as people of faith on our own physicality. And so then took a long time to get to a place. And in fact, because of the tendency to be mindful of our minds and our kind of intellectual capacity, and then maybe our emotional awareness, so for me, that was, through different kinds of therapy and like spiritual direction. But you can get to a point where it's like, okay, now maybe the next phase is really like, how do you begin to integrate your physical body and into being in tune with that so that you can listen. I mean, I think one of the really interesting, I don't know if we want to jump into this now, but like I think a key moment for me in understanding this is like, as part of the created world, you see this all around, that, often, if you're even just around your house or somewhere where there's other, like squirrels, for example, they get startled or something, they immediately pause, kind of take stock of their environment to make sure they're safe, and then they will continue on, and they'll just kind of freeze and take a look and make sure they're okay. And we've become, I think, so disconnected that we don't actually stop and kind of touch base with ourselves physically, like, am I okay? Am I safe? And often our body can communicate to us things before we can process it kind of intellectually and emotionally to understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't hear or interpret those messages unless there really is that kind of pathway of communication between our physical bodies and our minds and our spirits. And so there's this real big example for me when I was first beginning conversations with my spiritual director about, hey, I may want to focus some energy on being more in tune with my physical body. And I was in this place, it was very safe for me. So I should have felt very safe. And someone who's in my life regularly, who I'm okay with now, like our relationship is good, there's nothing wrong, but who I'd known for a long time. And there are some, just historical wounds from that relationship. And so I was caught off guard by seeing this person in this place. And it was a very weird sensation as a grown man who doesn't feel even physically unsafe at all around this person. But I saw them, and my body immediately said, like, before I even knew what I was doing, I turned around and walked away. Like I didn't. And then I began to unpack, like, what was going on. And it was that my body still, because I was kind of caught off guard and surprised seeing this person there, was like, hey, there's still a level of feeling unsafe with this person around. And so my body kind of took over and it's like, let's get you to safety, which means not being in this person around this person. And so, and as a side note, if you really have some interest in understanding like our physical body, there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. We don't have time to get into that too much today. But it really talks about how our bodies actually trap these experiences on a cellular level and will remember. So that was my experience of my body remembering something that my brain hadn't in that moment. It was like, why am I feeling, why am I doing this? And there are countless experiences people have of kind of something reminding them of a past experience or traumatic experience, and their bodies having a very real remembrance of that trauma. And then their body kind of taking over to protect them before they even understood what was happening. So that was my experience of like, oh, I need to be more in connection with my body because it was protecting me in a way that I didn't even know what was happening. And so how do I then begin to have, again, open up these pathways of communication and learn from, like, pay attention to, if I'm somewhere and I feel my heart rate raise and I feel these different sensations going on, being aware of like, okay, I'm getting elevated. I may not respond in a way that I want to respond right now. So is there a way for me to get some space or just understand what's happening so that I can respond? And I think the whole point is that we want to transform more into Christlikeness. So part of that is understanding, hey, I feel like I'm gonna be really reactive if I continue in this conversation right now. So how do I give myself a break or say, hey, I don't like the way this conversation is going, rather than kind of escalate the conversation that goes somewhere where no one wants it to go, right? And so even for us, we can talk about how this happens, in a marriage or some kind of close, intimate relationship. But if we can be in the moment aware of what's happening, we can say, hey, can we push pause? I'm not going to be able to respond well without taking a break here. But our tendency is to not pay attention to that, and it just kind of escalates things. So
it's good.
Yeah.
We don't have it all figured out, but we're on a journey. So John says, Scripture reminds us the body is a temple, which we need to take care of. And I love that John mentions this because Scripture does say that. And yet, at different periods throughout Christian history, the body has been denied or just forced kind of out of the picture. Or there have been very simplistic rules around the body. And we could have like a whole other conversation just about healthy sexuality. But the church has had such a tricky relationship with sexuality and has denied it so much that in some studies it is shown that like Christian men and pastors have like much greater porn addictions and things than the average man. And I think there is something to denying and repressing things and not learning healthy and holy outlets for what is hardwired into our being. And then I mentioned this, but we have all of this stuff coming from the world about how we should look, who we should be, with a real thrust in recent centuries on productivity and achievement. And so our bodies run at a pace most of the time where we're not even in touch with nature, what God has made, let alone ourselves. And, throughout the ages, and we certainly see this in our scriptures and throughout the Psalms, there's this understanding that our awareness of God and our self-awareness should always be running parallel and that they grow together. And so if we don't have a better understanding of who we are and what makes us tick, and healing from past wounds and being able to distance ourselves from kind of, whether we want to call it like our cyclical sin patterns or our false self stuff or our ego, or if we're not becoming increasingly aware of that, it's going to be very difficult to be freed from some of our wrongful ideas of God. I think that we all have a tendency to create God in our image rather than the other way around, and to be able to be transformed into God's image. And I think that this is a big piece of that. What do you want to say?
Yeah, well, I just think that there's this, I think it's really important that, understanding these are all kind of tools to become our most whole selves.
Yeah.
Which is, being transformed by Christ. And it's into the virtues of Christ, the way Christ loved and lived in this world, but as distinctly us. Like that is the gift I think that God has given each one of us, is that not that we become somebody else, but that we become the best versions of us. Because, you can talk about the scripture, we were knit together in our mother's womb, right? God created us distinctly. The point is not to lose any of our distinctiveness, but to embody that distinctiveness fully in the most healthy way possible. And so
reclaim it.
Yeah. And part of that is our physicality and understanding what's happening in our body is a pathway to deeper self-understanding. And if we think that our self-understanding needs to grow kind of concurrently with our understanding of God, meaning our understanding of God actually will reach a point that stops if we're not also growing and understanding ourselves, because then it's just informational, it's not experiential. And
that was good.
Oh, thanks. We tend to want to learn a lot about God, but rather than experience God here and now, and do the kind of transformative kind of inner work to be more like Christ and our most whole self.
Yeah. So, okay, some specifics, and we'll do this for a few more minutes. If this subject is interesting to you or you have more questions, we can always.
Did I tell the author The Body Keeps the Score?
I don't know.
So the book that I referenced earlier, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk is the author. But I think if you look for the title, you'll find it. And it's just a really great resource and really gets into the science of understanding what's the physicality of different experience, and that everything from like a car accident and how, they can do brain scans to understand how our brains process these events and really relive them in a way that the brain doesn't interpret as different than the actual experience.
Yeah.
And that's why we have this reactivity in ourselves, sometimes that we surprise ourselves with. It's like, where did that come from? I think we've all had that conversation with ourselves at some point. It's like, wow, did not like how I responded there. Where did that come from? It was disproportionate to the situation, but it really is probably tapping into something that needs to still be resolved. And I think one thing I wanted to go back to is like, it's not just about, it's about healthy expression too of physicality. Like, I had a really difficult kind of experience a few weeks ago, and I was talking about it with a friend. Like, hey, what do you need to do to get that out? Because I tend to be someone who wants to really always have an even keel no matter what. And that can be really positive or strong. It could be a very positive thing, but can also be really negative, meaning I don't allow myself to feel.
We'll circle back to this.
A full range of emotion, like just kind of living in the small range versus being able to feel the full joy and feel full weight of things. But this friend had said, hey, do you need to grab a tennis racket and hit a mattress? Like we need to have these really healthy expressions of physicality. I talked about with my spiritual director one time when I'm getting really frustrated with the kids, like just dropping down and doing 10 push-ups myself, so I don't react from that place, because it does need some kind of physical expression, but we want it to be healthy physical expressions. So understanding again what we need, taking those pauses in the moment, and then what do I actually need to let this, whatever this is, healthily express itself, because then we can kind of move on, and it comes full cycle, and it doesn't kind of stay in us trapped, because that, you mentioned that repression, and we've seen that especially in the church in a lot of different ways, both Protestant and Catholic, all across the board, these versions of repression. And we have all these really, big evangelical leaders too, who have these, secondary lives.
It's not just the priests.
It's lots of things, but a lot of that is a result of that repression, because stuff comes out sideways, right? So that whether we repress emotion, sexuality stuff, as that gets repressed, it's going to come out somewhere. So how do we have health? Like, how do we do this and work through this in a healthy way?
So I'd say that I mentioned our marriage. Okay, good. You just touched on that. You guys are like in sync. So Jeremy mentioned, and let me just say, first of all, this is an agenda thing, and people often like peg women to be more this and men to be more this way. Some of my close guy friends process life and stress and anxiety very similarly to me. And then we have some female friends that really are in sync with Jeremy. And, at another point, we could talk about personality types and Enneagram. That's a different conversation. But I'd say that our processing of life experiences would show up in marriage in the same patterns that had always been prevalent in our families of origin. So Jeremy just learned to go inside and underground, and to numb pain and to numb stress, and to, what's the word? Like, I don't want to say disappear. But I would feel like I was with him, but he was absent. Like he wasn't with me. He was present. He wasn't fully present.
As a way to kind of distance myself from whatever was there to be felt. I could kind of distance myself from feeling the full weight of that emotion.
And I have a lot of, edges that I've needed to work on. But I am very engaged. I am a very engaged person. I'm passionate. I'm highly sensitive. I feel things very deeply. And when that's not dealt with appropriately, so if Jeremy numbs out and kind of disappears, my emotions go to rage. And I wish they didn't, but since I was young, like my parents have, a lot of like funny stories about when I hit my limit and Kim goes to like crazy rage. And maybe that's a family thing. Like there are some tempers in my family, but like more so than my sisters, that has been like an outlet. But I think the thing that angers me more than anything is someone not being present. So I'm married then to a man who shuts down with my intensity, and which makes me more intense and more aggressive, which
It's a bad cycle.
it was a bad cycle. But you can see how like we have these things that overlap into all the areas of our life. So it was impacting our marriage, but at some point we realized, oh, this is like a bigger divine God journey. This involves some understanding of where we come from and why we have responded to life in the way that we have, and what our growth points are, and then and how to use different tools. So we've used some of the same tools, but for different reasons. So when I get unhealthy and stressed, I go to like the isms, like perfectionism, workaholism, greater intensity. I don't lay off, I don't rest, and then I become, not who God made me to be. And so a lot of these body practices it's been really important for me to learn how to orient to pleasure, like how to experience in my body, feeling alive. Nature plays a big role in that. Breathing, prayer, contemplative prayer forms that slow me down. Exercise. John talked about the temple.
Mhm.
I mean, what we eat, how we work out, and I'm not talking about like our culture's obsession with exercise and cute workout clothes. I'm talking about how our bodies were made to move and to feel and to get sore muscles and to, live in this holistic way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think too that for me that like being aware of certain sensations allows me to stay more in the present. So like one of the things that has happened for me is that there is a real very specific physical sensation that happens when I begin to feel overwhelmed in a certain situation. And so now I've been able to identify, oh, when this sensation starts, and it starts in my gut, really, in my chest, and it's like it's a very specific thing that I've been able to identify. It's like, oh, okay. So I can either say, okay, here's where I'm at, stay here, everything's fine. Like, and that could, I know Kim did a kind of orienting practice around, things I see and hear. So I can be like, okay, look, I'm going to do that. So I stay here in the present moment. But that physical sensation really gives me a window into, oh, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. And my body's telling me that before I really process it. In the past, for me, I would just get to a place where I'm like, and I'm already checked out. And it's much longer to get back to the present once I've gone and I'm like in kind of overwhelm and like, now I'm not going to come back, versus, oh, I sense this. So either I can do things to keep myself in the present, or if I'm really healthy, I can say, hey, can we take a pause? I just need a couple minutes because this is really important to me. And I want to make sure that I stay with you. So that's another way that physicality helps. It really can help people stay in the moment.
Yeah, I wanted to, because Ali asked about, so yeah, we'll wrap up in just a couple minutes. So Ali asked about examples of getting it out.
Yeah, so I mentioned
push-ups and
yeah, so I think exercise is really important for me because that's a way that if I can continue to exercise, get it out. Now,
and can I just say, Jeremy and I, maybe me more than you, we took like 12 years off using our bodies in terms of exercise when we had children. It was like with little ones and work and seminary, and there was like over a decade where we weren't exercising regularly. Mm-hmm. So I'd say in the last 6 years for both of us, that has shifted. 7 years maybe, and now it's part of our rhythm. It took a really long time to figure out how to like work that in and whatever, but that has helped. I have just struggled with depression and the emotional piece I talked about. So exercise is just critical. to my mental health, but it's critical to Jeremy for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. I think, whether to answer all these questions. So I think, I hadn't thought of this. My friend who suggested just hitting a mattress with a tent, like something that's, hey, this is not going to hurt anyone. It's like a good expression of anger. There was I didn't ever
Punching
do
a
this.
pillow.
Yeah, punching a pillow, screaming into a pillow. There are things we need to do to get those things out. So I think those are just a couple. There was as a side note, this little a rage a few years ago, like smashing plates. Like you could go to a place and actually pay money to smash and throw plates. Like it didn't last that long, but it's like it's an example of like, hey, there's a need to express ourselves that gets sometimes it's violent, but it's not really violent in a way that hurts anyone or yourself. And so it's like a really good actual like, I need to physically get this out of my body. So I think that's some people, it's a punching bag. So I think it's different for different people, but we really do need to get out. And I think Allie, even for you, like I think something like powerlifting is like that's a very heavy physical, like high physical exertion. Those are good ways to get that kind of pent up stuff out of our bodies.
So physical movement, and I will say that one thing we do, not for Pilates, I've actually have never done Pilates, but we did buy a Pilates ring years ago. For our kids, because we noticed we were learning more about how like God gives us all these tools, and sometimes textures calm us. We have one child that has angry outbursts, and the Pilates ring was really, we instead of taking out on your siblings, go get the Pilates ring. And he'd have to like squeeze this ring together and count to get out some of his big emotions. So finding outlets that were healthy were important. But I just want to name that some people have like all this stuff that they need releases from, and some have trouble feeling or being in their body at all. And so just becoming attentive to what our sensations are, what are, sometimes there's a waking up that needs to happen, because some are more prone to numb out or to avoid or to run. Some are more prone to fight or to engage in a different way. And so those are some of, I feel like we could go on, but okay. I think that's a good stopping point. Okay, so here's what I'll leave you with. As John mentioned, these bodies of ours are our temple. And we're told that we house the Spirit, like the Spirit lives in us. And Christ showed up as a human baby and all the vulnerability of that. And after the resurrection, came back not with the wounds gone, but with wounds still open and the scars still in place. There's this sense of bodies as mattering, and that I would say matters to God. Our sacraments, whether it's the physicality of water in baptism or the bread and the wine of communion, there's this physical embodied experience. And so I think that's just my question for you is, why do our bodies matter? What learning awaits for you in paying attention to your body and not just judging it for its wounds or its experiences or its shame, but understanding that actually your body may be speaking to you about longings? And how might God show up for you through your body and through what your body is trying to communicate to you? Do you want to ask anything? Is that it?
I think those are great questions to sit with.
Hey, there's links to our website and my email address. If you want to do another round of, I have a couple of ideas for coming convos with Kim, but we'd be happy to, this might be kind of a new concept or aspect of spirituality. And so if you want to hash through this more, send me your questions, but pay attention to your body and how you can show up for yourself and how God is showing up. And maybe in your time with God, like see what it's like to take on a prayer posture of laying on the ground or kneeling. That's a whole other layer of this, is integrating our bodies in worship and in experiencing the fullness of God. So, okay, we're going to close there. Hey, thank you. Thanks to Jeremy for joining us. And peace to you all as we continue to shelter in place, and also love in place as well. So peace and blessings to you all. We'll be in touch real soon.